He reached for her hand in the dark and chose the wrong woman. Not by accident, not out of confusion. His fingers moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had done this before, who knew exactly where to find what he was looking for. He touched the inside of her wrist, traced the edge of a small mole no one would know about unless they had spent real time there, in the dark, learning her. Then he smiled, lifted the blindfold, looked directly at the woman whose hand he was holding. And that woman was not his bride. She was his bride's best friend. The room went completely silent. Not the polite quiet of a game that had run its course, the airless, collapsing silence of something that cannot be taken back. Amara Vance stood 3 feet away in her wedding gown, watching the man she had planned to marry hold another woman's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. She did not scream. She did not run. She just stood there, learning, in the space of a single breath, that the last 6 years of her life had been built on something that was never what she thought it was. If you had been standing in that room, if that had been your hand he passed over, your face he looked through, your best friend he reached for instead, what would you have done? Before we go further, if stories like this one speak to something you've lived or something you've feared, please subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, because the women who need to hear it are everywhere. Now let's go back to where it really started. Amara Vance had been organizing other people's perfect moments for 11 years. She knew how to turn a raw event space into something that made people cry from beauty. She knew the precise angle at which a floral centerpiece should be positioned to read well in photographs. She knew how to manage a difficult client, a collapsing vendor, a storm system moving toward an outdoor venue, and a mother of the bride who had opinions about everything, all simultaneously, without losing her composure or her billing rate. What she did not know, or had not allowed herself to know, was the particular kind of chaos that does not announce itself until it has already destroyed everything. She was 33 years old, and she was 12 hours away from her own wedding when she started to understand. The lakeside estate sat 20 minutes north of Chicago on a stretch of Lake Michigan shoreline that wealthy families had been fighting over for generations. Amara had booked it 14 months ago, before most of the guest list was finalized, because she knew venues like this did not hold for sentiment. You paid the deposit or you lost it to someone who had already written the check. She had written the check herself, a detail Jae-hyun had approved by text while she was on a call with the florist, because that was how their relationship worked. She handled it. He approved it. The difference between those two things had seemed manageable once. Kang Jae-hyun was 40 years old, careful in the way only certain men are careful, the kind of careful that looks like elegance from a distance and reveals itself as control only when you are already inside it. He moved through rooms as though he had calculated the geometry of them in advance. He spoke in complete sentences that never wandered. He was never late and never flustered, and never, in 6 years, had Amara seen him apologize for anything he had actually meant to do. She had loved that about him once. The steadiness, the certainty. After years of scraping for stability, student debt and borrowed furniture, and the particular exhaustion of being the first in your family to build anything from scratch, Jae-hyun's solidity had felt like solid ground under her feet. She had not asked, early enough, what was underneath it. The night before the ceremony, the bridal party had gathered in the estate's main salon for what Zuri called a rehearsal game. Low lights, champagne, the soft-edged excitement of a night that was supposed to feel like the beginning of something. Zuri Caldwell had been Amara's closest friend for 12 years. They had met in a philosophy lecture their sophomore year, two women who had nothing obvious in common. Amara organized, exacting, furiously competent. Zuri warm, instinctive, the kind of person who remembered what you had been wearing the day something important happened to you. They had built a friendship from opposition and grown into something closer to the same person over time, the way long friendships sometimes do. Zuri had been beside Amara through the worst years. Through the months after Amara's mother died, when Amara stopped eating regularly and forgot to pay her electric bill, and cried in public in ways she had never cried before and never wanted to again. Zuri had slept in Amara's bed, literally slept beside her, for 2 weeks straight, because Amara could not tolerate waking up alone to the silence of an apartment that still smelled like her mother's lotion. That was the woman standing in the salon suggesting party games. The game was simple enough. Someone asked Jae-hyun questions about Amara. Personal questions, the kind that signal intimacy, what her favorite flower was, what she was allergic to, The nickname her close friends used. Trivia that a man on the eve of his wedding should know by instinct. He got the flower wrong. He said dahlias. Amara's favorite flower was white peonies. She had mentioned it on their second date, had entire arrangements of them at the apartment, had told the florist to build every centerpiece from them. Dahlias were what Zuri grew on her apartment balcony. It registered as a small thing. Men forget these details. Amara had long ago stopped expecting Jae-hyun to track the small things. Then someone asked about her allergy. Jae-hyun answered without hesitating. Tree nuts, he said, specifically cashews. Amara was allergic to shellfish. She had been allergic to shellfish since childhood. She had told him this at a restaurant 6 weeks after they met, when she had needed to ask the waiter to confirm a dish was safe. Jae-hyun had been there. He had nodded and flagged the waiter himself. Cashews were what Zuri was allergic to. Amara knew this because she had called poison control on Zuri's behalf 8 years ago, after a catered event neither of them knew would include cashew-crusted chicken. The room had gone slightly quiet after the allergy question. Not dramatically. Just the almost imperceptible shift that happens when a room of people simultaneously becomes aware that something is slightly off. Then came the nickname. The question was casual. What do your closest friends call you when it's just them? Amara had one such nickname, used only by people who had known her long enough to watch it develop organically. From a moment, most of them couldn't even remember anymore. It was specific and private and meaningless to anyone outside the circle. Hyun wrote down a different name. The name he wrote was what Zuri's inner circle called Zuri. Amara looked at the card. She looked at the name. She felt something move in her chest that was not quite a feeling yet. Not shock, not grief, not rage. Just the physical sensation of something reorganizing itself, the way a building sounds before it falls. She smiled because the room was watching her, because she was a professional in the management of other people's experiences, because smiling at a rehearsal game was what a bride was supposed to do. Inside, she was already counting backward. The blindfold challenge came the following morning. It had been Zuri's idea originally, suggested during an earlier phone call as something sweet and romantic. Jae-hyun would recognize his bride by touch alone, proof of an intimate knowledge that transcended sight. At the time, Amara had thought it was a little theatrical but harmless, the kind of thing that plays well in the moment and makes a good story later. She was not thinking about the story anymore. Several women stood in a loose line in the bridal suite. Jae-hyun's hands had been wrapped lightly at the wrists so he could not check his watch. His best man had secured the blindfold. Jae-hyun moved down the line, measured, unhurried, the way he did everything. He touched Amara's hand, held it for 3 seconds, set it down and moved on. Amara stood very still. He reached the end of the line and paused, then went back. His fingers moved differently when he reached Zuri, slower, more deliberate. He turned her hand over. His thumb found the inside of her wrist and traced it with the kind of familiar precision that does not come from meeting someone at a friend's birthday party or seeing them at dinner twice a year for 6 years. He found the mole, pressed gently against it like something he was relieved to locate. He took her hand. "There's no way I wouldn't recognize her," he said. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. He pulled the blindfold off, still smiling, the easy, genuine smile he rarely showed in public, the one Amara had once believed was hers specifically. He looked at Zuri. The smile stayed. His eyes moved to Amara after a full second had already passed. The room rearranged itself around that second. Amara counted faces. The bridesmaids who were looking at the floor. The maid of honor who was looking at Amara with a careful, held expression that said she had noticed something but did not know what to do with it. Zuri, who had gone very still under Jae-hyun's hold, whose face had flushed in a way that Amara recognized because she had seen that flush before, had always attributed it to warmth or champagne or the particular brightness Zuri brought to social situations. She was looking at it differently now. Jae-hyun dropped Zuri's hand. The moment dissolved back into noise and laughter, and someone pouring more mimosas, and Amara smiled through all of it with the professional steadiness that had gotten her through catering disasters and collapsed venue bookings, and the days she had stood at her mother's hospital bedside and managed 3 vendor calls while her world was ending. She was good at continuing. She was so good at continuing. The voice recognition test came 20 minutes later, another of Zuri's games. Jae-hyun stood at the far end of the hallway, blindfolded again, while recorded voices played through a small speaker. He had to identify his bride by voice alone. There were 6 recordings. He answered on the 4th one. The 4th one was Zuri. He said her name. Not Amara's name, Zuri's name. Out loud, clearly, without any hesitation at all, in front of everyone. Someone laughed nervously and said, "He must have cheated somehow, must have heard something that gave it away." And Jae-hyun removed the blindfold, looking briefly, just briefly, like a man who understood he had made an error of some kind but could not determine the exact shape of it. He recovered fast. He always recovered fast. "I was testing the sound quality," he said, which was exactly the kind of thing Jae-hyun said when he needed a room to move on. And rooms always moved on for Kang Jae-hyun, because rooms always did. Amara moved on. She went to the bathroom. She ran cold water over the inside of her wrists, the wrists he had not stopped at, the wrists he had passed over without the slow, deliberate recognition he had given to someone else's. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment, not crying. She had not given herself permission to cry yet, because crying meant something was real, and she was not ready to let it be real. She needed evidence. She needed something that was not a game and a misremembered flower and a name on a card. She needed something she could look at directly and not explain away. She went back to the suite, sat down beside the wedding tablet she used to manage the event logistics, and started looking. She had the master account credentials for the estate. She had booked every room, every vendor service, every catered meal through a single account she controlled. She had never looked at the secondary bookings because there had been no reason to. She was the one who made the bookings, and she knew what she had made. She looked now. 2 months before the wedding date, a suite had been booked through the master account. Not by her. She had not made this booking and had not been notified of it, because it had been made with her credentials by someone who knew them, someone she had given access to the account for scheduling purposes in the early months of planning. The suite had 2 registered guests. The first was Kang Jae-hyun. The second was Zuri Caldwell. Amara sat very quietly with the tablet in her hands. Outside the bathroom door, she could hear bridesmaids laughing about something, the particular bright sound of women enjoying a morning that still felt safe to them. She kept reading. The notification had come to the estate management app she used to coordinate vendor arrivals and timeline updates. An app that was also connected to the wedding planning thread she shared with Jae-hyun. She had missed it because she had been managing 6 simultaneous conversations on a different platform on the day it arrived. She found it now. A message from Jae-hyun to Zuri, sent through the shared planning thread by accident or carelessness or the specific arrogance of a man who had never needed to be careful before. 3 words at first. Does she know? Then Zuri's answer. The answer was not yes or no. The answer was 3 sentences that Amara read twice, then a third time, then sat within the locked bathroom while the mimosas were poured and the morning continued without her. Zuri said, "She doesn't suspect anything. She's too focused on the ceremony details. We just need to get through tomorrow. We just need to get through tomorrow. 6 years, 12 years. 2 calendars of time laid across each other like transparencies on a light table, and what Amara had thought were 2 separate relationships had been one arrangement all along, and she was the only person in it who had not known the terms. She stood up. She splashed water on her face. She dried it on a white towel that cost more per thread count than her first apartment's monthly rent. She looked at herself again. "Okay," she said quietly. Not to anyone. Not to herself exactly. Just out loud, because sometimes the only way to begin the next part is to say one word into the silence and let it settle. She put the tablet down on the edge of the sink. She straightened the towel. She unlocked the bathroom door. She walked back into the suite, accepted a glass of champagne, and began making calculations. Because Amara Vance was very, very good at managing events, and this one was not over yet. Amara walked back into the bridal suite carrying a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking. The suite had gotten louder in the minutes she had been gone. Someone had connected a phone to the small Bluetooth speaker near the vanity, and a song was playing that Amara recognized from a playlist Zuri had made for a girls' trip they had taken to New Orleans 3 years ago. She remembered sitting in the back of a rideshare with Zuri, both of them exhausted and sunburned and laughing at something neither of them would be able to reconstruct later. And Zuri had put her head on Amara's shoulder and said she hoped they would still be doing this when they were 70. That memory sat inside Amara's chest now like a stone in standing water. She set the champagne on the vanity and picked up her lipstick. Her hands were steady. She had always had steady hands. It was something her mother used to point out when Amara was young, watching her thread a needle or measure medicine into a small cup, her fingers never trembling even when she was frightened. Her mother had called it a gift. Amara had grown up understanding it as a requirement. In the mirror, she could see the whole room. She used the reflection the way she sometimes used a venue walkthrough, systematically, cataloging what was where, what was touching what should not be touching at all. Zuri was standing near the window with a mimosa in her hand, laughing at something one of the bridesmaids had said. Her laugh was the same as it had always been, open and slightly too loud, the kind of laugh that made other people feel invited. Amara had loved that laugh. She had relied on it in hard rooms, in awkward silences, in all the small social emergencies that Zuri had always known how to dissolve. She watched Zuri laugh in the mirror and thought about the message. We just need to get through tomorrow. Zuri's eyes crossed the room and found Amara's in the mirror. A half second, no more. Zuri smiled, the specific warm smile she had given Amara 10,000 times before, the one that said, I see you, I'm here, we're good, and looked away. Amara put the lipstick down. She turned from the mirror. I need to check in with the coordinator, she said, to no one specifically, which was how she had always moved through event spaces, announcing her departures without asking permission, because she was the one running things and everyone understood that. Nobody questioned it. She found Elena, the estate's senior events coordinator, in the service corridor behind the ceremony pavilion. Elena was a compact, precise woman in her late 40s who had worked at this property for 16 years and had coordinated somewhere over 400 weddings. She had the particular quality of someone who had witnessed enough human chaos to be unshockable, which was one of the reasons Amara had wanted her specifically. I need to look at the secondary booking records from February, Amara said. Elena did not flinch. The account records? The full log. I know what I booked. I want to see what else was booked through my account. Elena held her gaze for a moment with the careful expression of someone doing rapid assessment. Then she nodded once and led Amara to the small coordinator's office off the east corridor, where she pulled the records on the property management screen without asking any further questions. It was all there. Printed, it would have been 3 pages. On screen, it was a clean column of dates and charges and names, and Amara stood over the desk and read it the way she read vendor contracts, without expression, beginning to end, missing nothing. The suite booking was exactly as she had found it on the tablet. February 9th. 2 guests. Chae-Hyun's name first, Zuri second, 3 nights. A total charge that had been routed through the master account and buried inside a cluster of vendor pre-authorization holds that Amara herself had set up, which meant it had been invisible to her unless she went looking, and she had not gone looking because she had trusted the account. She had trusted all of it. There was a dinner booking as well. February 10th, the estate's private dining room, reserved under a corporate identifier connected to Chae-Hyun's holding company. 2 covers. No names on the reservation itself, but the date sat between the check-in and the check-out, and the arithmetic was simple. Thank you, Amara said. Elena said nothing. She closed the screen. Amara walked back into the corridor and stood very still for approximately 8 seconds. She counted them. 8 seconds of standing in a service corridor in her wedding gown with this information inside her, and then she made a decision about the next 4 hours that was so clear and so precise, it felt almost like relief. She was going to finish this day herself. Not the way they had planned it, her way. She needed one more thing first. She went back to the suite, waited until the room shifted into the natural chaos of the getting ready hour. Hair, makeup, the minor drama of a broken zipper on one bridesmaid's dress. And then she moved to the corner where she had left the wedding tablet. The thread between Chae-Hyun and Zuri was what she needed. The full thread, not just the preview. She opened it. It went back 11 months. Amara stood in the corner of the bridal suite, surrounded by the noise of her own wedding morning, and read 11 months of her life from the outside. The early messages were careful. Chae-Hyun asking Zuri to confirm details about Amara's preferences, which restaurants she would find too loud, which florists she had strong opinions about, which investors she genuinely respected versus those she merely tolerated. Practical intelligence gathering, conducted through the woman who knew Amara best. Reading those messages was like watching someone pick a lock with a key that had been made from your own fingerprint. Then the register shifted. By March, the messages had become something else entirely. Shorter. Warmer. the particular shorthand that develops between two people who have stopped performing for each other. A reference to something they had apparently discussed in person that Amara could not reconstruct. A message from Jae-hyun that said simply, "last night and nothing else," and Zuri's response, which was a single word that Amara did not read twice. By May, Zuri was advising Jae-hyun on the waterfront development deal. This was the part that made Amara's hands go cold for the first time all morning. The Mujin waterfront project had been Jae-hyun's flagship legitimate investment for 2 years, a hotel and mixed-use redevelopment on a stretch of lakefront that Chicago's development community had been circling for a decade. It was large enough to redefine the legitimate side of his business portfolio entirely, which was what he wanted, what he needed. Amara knew this because she had listened to him talk about it for 2 years, understood the economics of it, in the way you understand something you have heard explained with genuine feeling by someone you love. What she had never agreed to do was recommend the project to the people she knew. She had refused twice. Politely, professionally, with reasoning she stood behind. The financial disclosure documents did not meet the standard she held her professional relationships to. The projected revenue models relied on assumptions she found optimistic past the point of credibility. She had told Jae-hyun this clearly, and he had accepted it, or she had believed he had accepted it. What Zuri had apparently told him in May was this: Amara won't push it herself, but she'll introduce you at the hospitality summit if you frame it as a personal favor. She doesn't say no to things when they're framed as personal favors from people she loves. That's the window. Amara read this sentence 3 times. She thought about the hospitality summit in June, where she had in fact introduced Jae-hyun to 2 members of the Waterfront Development Committee. Not because she had been manipulated, she had believed at the time, but because it had felt natural, because Jae-hyun had asked gently, and the moment had presented itself, and she had done it the way she did most things in their relationship, smoothly, without fully examining why. Zuri had mapped the window. Jae-hyun had stepped through it. She kept reading. By August, the messages made the structure plain. Jae-hyun would marry Amara. He would use the marriage to complete the committee introductions and close the development deal, which required a level of social legitimacy his background in freight logistics and private capital did not naturally provide, but that Amara's professional reputation could supply. Once the project closed, the arrangement would change. Zuri understood the timeline. Zuri had agreed to the timeline. There was a message from Jae-hyun in September that Amara read twice, then closed the thread. She had seen enough. She stood in the corner of the bridal suite and did the things she had taught herself to do in the worst moments of event management, when everything was collapsing and the clients were panicking and the solution was not yet visible. She went very still on the inside. She let the information finish arriving, and she began to build. By the time her maid of honor came to get her for the ceremony walkthrough, Amara had a plan. It required 1 phone call and 1 conversation with Elena. She made the call in the bathroom, standing at the window, watching a groundskeeper move across the lawn below with the unhurried precision of someone who had no idea what was happening inside the building. The call took 4 minutes. The person she called did not ask questions, because Amara had done enough favors for enough people that a 4-minute call with an unusual request was within the range of reasonable. She found Elena again in the corridor after the walkthrough. "The projector in the ceremony pavilion," she said. "I need it operational during the ceremony, not just for the photo display at the beginning." Elena nodded. "I can arrange that. I also need a direct input from this." She handed Elena a USB drive, connected and ready before the processional begins. Elena looked at the drive, looked at Amara's face, said nothing about either. "Consider it done," Elena said. The next 2 hours passed the way the final hours before any large event passed, through the specific controlled insanity of 100 small things demanding resolution simultaneously. A florist needed a pin confirmation on the ceremony arch placement. The officiant had a question about the vow timing. One of Jae-hyun's groomsmen could not locate his boutonniere and was quietly frantic in the way tall men sometimes are about small problems. Amara handled each of these things with the competence that had made her career. And she waited. Jae-hyun came to find her 30 minutes before the ceremony. This was not traditional. They had agreed to the convention of not seeing each other before the processional, a decision Amara had made for aesthetic reasons. It made for better photographs, better emotional impact at the aisle moment. Jae-hyun had agreed without caring much either way. But he came anyway, knocking on the suite door in the measured way he knocked on every door, The knock of a man who was not asking permission. She opened it. He was in his suit, dark charcoal, perfectly cut, the kind of suit that had been made for his body specifically, and sat on it like a statement. He looked exactly like himself, contained, polished, the surface so smooth and consistent that you could almost believe there was nothing underneath it. He looked at her face. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt. Jae-hyun did not do guilt in the conventional way. She understood that now with a clarity she had not had this morning. What she saw was assessment. I was reading her, checking the perimeter of her expression for signs of what she knew or didn't know, running the same quiet analysis he applied to everything. You look, he started. Jae-hyun, he stopped. Is there something you want to tell me? She said. The question was quiet. She had not raised her voice, and she would not raise her voice because this was not a conversation that needed volume. He heard it clearly anyway. She watched him hear it, the slight adjustment behind the composure, the half-second recalibration. Is something wrong? He said. I'm asking you a question. Amara. His voice moved into the register she recognized, the one he used with people who needed settling, the executive tone that made rooms feel smaller. We have guests arriving, whatever is... I know about the suite, she said. Silence. She watched him decide. She had watched Jae-hyun make decisions before, in meetings and negotiations, and the quiet domestic moments where his choices had always been legible to her. This one was different. This one was the decision of a man who has been playing a very long game and has just heard an unexpected move and needs to determine whether it is a checkmate or a bluff. He chose to deny it. I book rooms through your account when I need client privacy, he said. You know this. The suite in February was for... Zuri was the second registered guest. He stopped talking. February 9th through the 12th, Amara said. I have the full record. I also have the thread. The thing behind his eyes changed. This was what she had needed to see. Not the denial. She had expected the denial. She had been prepared for it. A man like Jae-hyun denied things as naturally as other men breathed. What she needed was the thing that happened after he understood the denial had failed. What she needed was the unguarded moment, however brief, when the calculation stopped and the reality of it came through. It lasted less than 3 seconds. Then he straightened. He put his hands in his pockets. He looked at her with an expression she had never seen from him before. Not remorse, not anger, not the controlled warmth he performed in public. Something older and more tired than any of those things. We should talk about this after, he said. After what? After the ceremony. She looked at him. You want me to walk down that aisle, she said slowly, not as a question, marry you in front of 200 people, and then talk about the fact that you have been sleeping with my best friend and using our wedding to close a business deal. He did not answer immediately. She had her answer in the silence. The project is important, he said finally, and the words landed in the room with such naked pragmatism that Amara almost laughed, would have laughed if she were not standing in a wedding gown in the last quiet minutes before everything she had built exploded in public. To you, she said, to both of us. The legitimacy this brings. I said no to recommending that project twice. Her voice was still flat, still controlled. I told you the financials didn't meet my standard. You heard me say that. I respected your position. And then you asked Zuri to find you another way in. He said nothing. Look at me, she said. He looked at her. Did you ever love me? She said. Or was I always just the most useful person in the room? The question sat between them. Outside the suite window, she could hear the faint sound of the string quartet warming up in the pavilion. Guests arriving, chairs filling, the ordinary orchestration of a wedding afternoon proceeding on schedule. Jae-hyun's jaw moved slightly. When he finally spoke, what he said was not an answer to her question. What he said was, everything I built to give us a real life. You understand that. I understand that you believe it, she said. That's not the same thing. He reached for her hand. She let him take it, briefly, one more second of the texture of his hand over hers, the particular way his fingers closed, and she thought about all the times she had found that grip reassuring, all the times she had mistaken steadiness for safety. She withdrew her hand. Go wait at the altar, she said. I'll be there when I'm ready. He looked at her for a long moment. The assessment ran again behind his eyes. I was trying to determine whether she was going to behave, whether the professional, composed, keep it together. Amara he had known for 6 years would prevail over whatever this was. She kept her face entirely still. He straightened his jacket. He left. Amara closed the door. She stood alone in the suite for exactly 90 seconds. She counted those too. Then she went to the vanity, checked her makeup in the mirror, smoothed the front of her gown with both palms, picked up her bouquet of white peonies, and went to find Zuri. Zuri was in the small anteroom at the end of the corridor, the one that connected to the bridal party staging area. She was alone. The other bridesmaids had already moved to their positions, touching up something near her collarbone with a compact. Her face angled toward a small window, and she looked up when Amara came in with the particular brightness of a woman who is performing uncomplicated happiness and has been performing it all day. The brightness lasted approximately 1 second after she saw Amara's face. "Hey," Zuri said, "we're almost—" "He came to see me." Zuri closed the compact, very slowly. "He told you?" she said. The question confirmed everything it needed to confirm. "He didn't tell me anything," Amara said. "I found the records myself, and the thread." Zuri's face did something complicated. It moved through 3 or 4 things in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, what might have been the beginning of an explanation, and then settled into something Amara had not expected. Something that looked, at least around the eyes, like relief, as though a weight had finally shifted to where it had always been going to land. "Amara, don't." The word came out quiet and complete. "I don't want the explanation right now. I'm not ready for it." Zuri pressed her lips together. "Was any of it real?" Amara said. "Any of it at all?" The question landed differently than the one she had asked Jae-hyun. She watched it land, watched Zuri's eyes fill, not performatively, not the practiced emotion of someone managing a scene, but the specific flooding of someone who is suddenly required to look directly at a damage they have spent months not looking at. "You know it was," Zuri said. "You know He knew about the mole on your wrist," Amara said. "He went straight to it. He knew exactly where it was." Zuri didn't answer. "How long have you been meeting him here, at this estate?" "Nothing." "The dinner booking in February was the private dining room. 2 covers. Amara's voice stayed level. "Did you sit in the room I designed and eat the food from the menu I approved?" Zuri looked at the floor. Amara stood there and breathed. 1 breath, 2. "I'm going to walk out to that pavilion," she said, "and I'm going to finish what I started, but I need you to understand something before I do." She waited until Zuri looked up at her. "I'm not walking away from him because he chose you," Amara said. "I'm walking away because neither of you ever chose me. You chose what I could do. That's a different thing, and I should have known the difference." Zuri's mouth opened. Amara picked up her bouquet from the side table and walked out of the anteroom. In the staging area, her father was waiting. Marcus Vance was 61 years old and a man of very few words, which Amara had always appreciated in the way you appreciate a thing you have needed your whole life. He looked at his daughter's face, and he did not ask any questions. He simply offered his arm. She took it. "Ready?" he said. "Almost," she said. She caught Elena's eye across the corridor. Elena gave one small nod. The drive on the USB was live. The projector was ready. The music began outside, drifting through the glass doors. The string quartet opening into the processional piece that Amara had selected 8 months ago during a planning session where Jae-hyun had been on a call for the first 40 minutes and had rejoined only to approve the caterer's final menu. She had chosen this piece alone, the way she had chosen most things, and she had thought at the time that it was simply a matter of their different strengths, that some people were detail people and some people were not, that what mattered was the shared life being built, not who had done the measuring. She walked down the corridor, through the glass doors and into the warm afternoon light above Lake Michigan, where 200 people rose to their feet at the sound of the music shifting into the processional, where the floral art she had designed anchored the end of the aisle, where Kang Jae-hyun stood beneath it, watching her come toward him with his hands folded in front of him and his face arranged into the expression of a man at his own wedding. She walked halfway down the aisle and stopped. Her father felt it the moment she stopped, felt the change in weight on his arm, and turned to look at her. She met his eyes briefly. She gave him a small nod that was both an answer and a thank you, and she released his arm. She turned to face the projection screen positioned behind the ceremony space, installed for the photo montage that was supposed to play during the cocktail hour. Elena activated the input. The screen lit. The first image was the blindfold footage from the bridal suite. 15 seconds of Jae-hyun's hand passing over Amara's, stopping at Zuri's, finding the mole with precise and unhurried familiarity. 200 people watched. Then the hotel record appeared, clean and readable. Jae-hyun's name and Zuri's name, side by side, dated 2 months before this day. Then the thread. 3 messages only. She had chosen the 3 that said everything that needed to be said, stripped of any context that could be argued about, plain enough for a room of strangers to understand in 20 seconds. The last message was the one that had cost Amara the most when she read it. Not the revelation of the affair, not even the deliberate plan to use her professional reputation. It was the one Jae-hyun had sent in September, responding to Zuri's question about whether he felt bad. He had written, "She'll recover. She's strong. She'll recover. She's strong." He had known, in September, that there would be something to recover from. The pavilion held the specific silence of a room that has just received information too large for immediate response, the silence before the reaction arrives. Jae-hyun's composure had not broken. I was moving toward her before the 3rd message finished displaying, and she watched him come with the calm of someone who has already made their decision and is simply waiting for the scene to resolve. Jae-hyun walked toward her the way he walked into every difficult room, without hurrying, without breaking his posture, with the contained forward momentum of a man who has never once believed that a situation was beyond his ability to manage. The projection screen was still lit behind her. 200 people had stopped breathing. He stopped 3 feet from her and spoke quietly, the way he always spoke when he most needed to be heard. Not a whisper. Quieter than that. The register that required everyone around him to go still in order to catch it, which was itself a form of control. Amara. He said her name the way you say the name of something you are attempting to de-escalate. There are people here who don't need to be part of this. She held her bouquet with both hands, low in front of her, the white peonies she had chosen for a wedding she had built from nothing over 14 months. And she looked at him with the specific steadiness that came from having already made every decision that mattered. "They're already part of it," she said. "You made them part of it when you sat in this room and planned to use me in front of them." Something moved in his jaw. "Whatever you think you found," he started. "I don't think anything." Her voice did not rise. "The suite is documented. The thread is documented. You wrote that I would recover. You wrote that in September." Behind her, she heard the first sounds of the crowd finding its voice. Murmurs, the scrape of a chair, someone making a sharp involuntary sound like a word that didn't quite form. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on Jae-hyun's face and watched him move through his options the way she had watched him move through business problems, methodical and fast, his mind running calculations behind a surface that most people read as calm. He reached for her arm, not aggressively, carefully, the same careful grip he had always used when guiding her through a room, through a crowd, through any situation where he wanted her positioned differently than she was positioning herself. 6 years of that grip. She knew its exact pressure and its exact intention. She stepped back. "Don't," she said. He stopped. From somewhere behind the ceremony rows, she heard a man's voice, one of Jae-hyun's, someone from the organization. She did not know his name, but recognized the specific quality of the silence he generated when he moved, the silence of someone people instinctively cleared space for. She heard chairs shifting, heard the crowd reconfiguring around a new variable. She did not look. "Amara." Jae-hyun's voice changed slightly. Still quiet, but with something underneath it now that she had heard before in fragments, during the 2 times she had come close to the real edges of his business life. During conversations she had not fully understood until now. "There are aspects of what you've put on that screen that involve more than us. You understand what I'm telling you." She understood exactly what he was telling her. I was telling her that the Mujin Syndicate had a stake in this moment. He was telling her that 200 people in a glass pavilion over Lake Michigan included some who answered to him in ways that had nothing to do with wedding invitations. He was telling her, in the language of someone who had spent 2 decades building a world where implied threats were cleaner and more effective than explicit ones, that she had miscalculated the risk. She looked at him. "You didn't love 2 women," she said. He blinked. "Once." "You wanted what each woman could give you," she said. "That's not love. That's inventory." The words went out into the silence of the pavilion and landed in 200 different places simultaneously. Jae-hyun's composure did not shatter. It would not shatter. She knew him well enough to know that, had always known that his control was not a performance layered over emotion, but something structural, built into the architecture of who he was, the way load-bearing walls are built into a building. You did not break it from the outside. It simply held. But something shifted. Something behind the eyes moved in a direction she had never seen it move before. Something she could not name precisely, but recognized the texture of, the thing that happens to a person when they understand for the first time that someone they have underestimated has been paying closer attention than they knew. Amara reached up and removed her engagement ring. She did not throw it. She did not press it into his palm with drama. She simply held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it between her fingers, 2.5 years on her hand, and she remembered the night he had given it to her, the careful restaurant, the way he had watched her face while she looked at the ring with an expression she had read as love and now understood as evaluation. She set it on the ceremony table beside the unsigned marriage license. She picked up her bouquet again. From behind her she heard Zuri, not a word, just a sound, a fractured exhale that was trying very hard not to become something louder. She heard it and felt it reach some place inside her chest that she did not have room to open right now, and she filed it away because that particular grief was going to need its own time and its own space, and this was not it. Chae-hyun caught her arm when she turned. His hand closed on her forearm with the same careful grip, and this time it was slightly more certain than the last. Slightly less request and slightly more statement. "We are not finished," he said quietly. "Yes, we are," she said. "Amara." The name again, the de-escalation register. "Walk with me. 3 minutes. Not here." She looked at his hand on her arm. She looked at his face. From her left, her father appeared. Marcus Vance did not say anything. He simply stood at Amara's shoulder with the particular gravity of a man who had spent 61 years deciding which hills were worth standing on. And he looked at the hand on his daughter's forearm with an expression that communicated, without a single word, that the hand had approximately 2 seconds to make a different decision. Jae-hyun looked at Marcus, released her arm. He stepped back. He straightened his jacket, the automatic gesture, the composure reasserting itself through muscle memory. And he looked at Amara one final time with an expression she would spend a long time afterward trying to accurately name. It was not anger. It was not grief in any form she recognized. It was something closer to the look of a man recalculating a loss he had not budgeted for. The particular expression of someone who has dropped something expensive and is already assessing replacement cost. Amara walked down the aisle, back toward the glass doors, her white peonies against the front of her gown and the afternoon light cutting across the pavilion floor in long, warm angles. And she felt 200 pairs of eyes on her back, and none of it mattered. None of it touched the part of her that was making decisions right now, the part that was already 3 steps ahead, already in the next thing, because that was how Amara Vance had always survived the unsurvivable, by not stopping in the middle of it. She pushed through the glass doors. The corridor was cool and quiet. The sound of the pavilion behind her was muffled immediately. The voices, the movement, the string quartet, who had not yet been told to stop playing and so had defaulted to something soft and ambient that floated through the glass like a signal from a different timeline. She stood in the corridor for a moment. Her hands were shaking, not dramatically. A fine tremor, barely visible, the body releasing something the mind had been holding compressed for the last 4 hours. She looked at her hands and acknowledged the shaking, the way she acknowledged most uncomfortable truths, directly, without flinching, without pretending it was not there. Then she walked to the coordinator's office, sat down in the chair across from Elena's desk, and said, "I need a car to the city. Whatever's available." Elena did not hesitate. 20 minutes. "Thank you. Is there anything else?" "No." Amara sat very still. "Thank you for today. You did everything right." Elena looked at her with the expression of a woman who had coordinated 400 weddings and had therefore seen a range of human catastrophe that most people would find incomprehensible, and she nodded once with a respect that felt earned rather than performed. She left to arrange the car. Amara sat alone in the office and let the shaking run its course. It lasted maybe 90 seconds. Then it stopped. And in the quiet after it stopped, the first real thing arrived. Not grief yet, not the full weight of 12 years and 6 years, and all the accumulated history of 2 relationships that had turned out to be something other than what she thought, but a smaller, more specific thing. She thought about her mother. Her mother had died 4 years ago in a hospital room in February, and Amara had been there, and Zuri had been there, and Jae-hyun had sent flowers. She had thought at the time that the flowers were a gesture from a man who was private about emotion, who expressed care through logistics rather than presence. She had defended that interpretation to herself for years, in the quiet moments when she noticed what was missing. Zuri had slept beside her for 2 weeks after the funeral. Zuri had been the one in the room when Amara's mother was moved from the regular ward to the end-of-life unit, and Zuri had held Amara's hand through the transfer, and Amara had believed completely that this was love. She still believed it was love. That was the part she could not simplify. Whatever Zuri had done in the last 11 months, she had also slept beside a grieving woman for 2 weeks in February 4 years ago, and those two things lived in the same person, and Amara was going to have to find a place to hold that contradiction for a very long time. She picked up her bouquet from the desk where she had set it. White peonies. She was still holding them. She set them down again and stood up. The car came in 15 minutes, not 20. She was in it before the pavilion had fully processed what had happened. She knew this because she could see the lights of the estate receding through the rear window, and there was still a cluster of vehicles in the main drive that had not yet begun to move, which meant people were still inside, still in the rearrangement phase of a shock that had nowhere yet to direct itself. She did not look back for long. The city came up around her as the car moved south on the Lake Highway, Chicago assembling itself from the dark water and the lit skyline, and Amara sat in the back seat in her wedding gown with her hands in her lap and thought about the next 24 hours with the cold, functional clarity that she always found, eventually, on the other side of the unsurvivable. She needed her apartment. She needed her passport and her financial documents and her laptop and her mother's blue glass vase and the old flower shears that had sat on her mother's kitchen windowsill for 20 years and now sat on Amara's. She was not going to stay in Chicago. She did not know this with full certainty yet. The decision was still forming, still finding its edges, but she felt the direction of it the way you feel a current before you understand you are already moving. What she did not know, what she would not know until the following morning, was what Jae-hyun was doing while she sat in the back of that car, watching the city come toward her. She found out at 7 the next morning. She had spent the night in her apartment. Her apartment, the one she had kept in her name specifically because Jae-hyun's offer to consolidate into his penthouse had always felt like a door she was not ready to walk through, and she understood now that her instincts had been operating on information her conscious mind had refused to process. She had packed 2 bags. She had moved with the systematic efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment without knowing she was rehearsing it, pulling exactly what mattered and leaving the rest. The vase wrapped in the center of the second bag, the shears beside it. She was making coffee at 6:50 when her phone rang. Not Jae-hyun, not Zuri. A number she recognized as belonging to a woman named Patricia Osei, who served on the board of the Chicago Hospitality and Development Association, one of the 2 committee members Amara had introduced to Jae-hyun at the June summit. She answered. Amara. Patricia's voice had the careful texture of someone delivering information they wish they did not have. I'm sorry to call so early. I heard about yesterday. I want you to know that I'm sorry, and I also want you to know something that I think you need to hear before it reaches you another way. Amara set down her coffee. There was a statement issued last night, Patricia said, through Jae-hyun's communications office. It names you as the project's hospitality and development consultant. It says you've been working on the waterfront project in an advisory capacity since last year and that you are committed to seeing it through completion. Amara stood at her kitchen counter and processed this. He named me as a consultant, she said. It went to the full development committee and to 3 editorial contacts at the Tribune business desk. Patricia paused. It was filed at 11:15 last night, about 2 hours after I left. Yes. Amara looked at the wall above her stove. There was a small water stain in the corner where the paint had bubbled and she had meant to fix it and never had. And she focused on it now with the particular concentration of someone who needs a fixed point while the room rearranges itself. He had filed the statement at 11:15. 2 hours after she walked away from his wedding, while she was in the back of a car watching the city come toward her, while she was allowing herself to believe that the walking away was the end of something. He had used her name anyway, without her signature on the marriage license, without her agreement, without anything except her professional reputation, which existed independently of her consent, which could be attached to his project by a press release and 3 phone calls to editorial contacts, which would now require her to spend time and professional capital. She did not have to actively refute something she had never agreed to. She understood now what she had not fully understood the night before, sitting in the back of that car in her wedding gown. The wedding itself had only been one mechanism. He had others. He had always had others, because a man who built what Jae-hyun had built did not operate with a single contingency. He operated with 4 contingencies, and a 5th one he kept in reserve. She was the 5th contingency. "Patricia," she said. Her voice was entirely level. "Thank you for calling me. What do you want to do?" "I'm going to send you a statement of my own before 9 this morning. I'd appreciate it if you shared it with the full committee." "Of course." She hung up. She opened her laptop. She wrote 3 paragraphs that were precise and professional and entirely devoid of emotion. A statement confirming that she had no advisory relationship with Kang Jae-hyun or any of his associated companies, that her name had been used without her knowledge or consent, and that any materials naming her in connection with the Mujin Waterfront Development Project were unauthorized and should be disregarded. She sent it to Patricia at 7:12. Then she sat at her kitchen table in the quiet of the apartment and felt something shift inside her that she did not have a clean word for. Not rage, though rage was part of it. Not grief, though grief was underneath everything. It was more like the specific cold clarity that comes when you finally understand the full shape of something you have been living inside of without being able to see its edges. He had planned for her to leave. She understood that now. The statement had been drafted before last night. It was too clean, too strategically positioned to have been written in 2 hours by a man whose public wedding had just collapsed in front of 200 witnesses. He had prepared it in advance as the contingency for exactly this scenario. Amara finds out and walks. Fire the press release immediately. Attach her name to the project before she can publicly disavow it. Create a narrow window of ambiguity in which the committee might hesitate to take her refutation at full face value. She had been outmaneuvered. Not in the wedding, not in the relationship, in the boardroom. That was where he had always intended to win, and she had spent all of her energy on the ceremony and none on the part that actually cost him something. She closed the laptop. She sat for a long time. Then she made a second call, this one to a man named David Su, an attorney she had worked with on venue contracts for 3 years, whose firm handled intellectual property and professional reputation litigation, and who had once told her, over a working lunch, that the most underused legal tool in professional disputes was the preemptive public record. David answered on the second ring. She told him everything in 11 minutes, including the press release, including the thread she had screenshotted on the wedding tablet, including the hotel records she had documented before the ceremony. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. "How much of this is documented?" he said. "All of it." "The thread screenshots, are they from your own account access?" "My account, my credentials, my master booking system." Another pause. "Okay," David said. "This is workable, more than workable. The unauthorized use of your professional identity in a public-facing commercial statement is actionable, and combined with documented evidence of the broader scheme." He stopped. "Amara, are you all right?" She looked at the water stain on the wall above the stove. "I'm figuring that out," she said. She let David begin the process. She gave him access to everything she had. She answered his questions with the same focused efficiency she brought to event logistics, because that was the only mode available to her right now, the only way she knew to be useful to herself when everything else had collapsed. By 8:30, the legal response was in motion. By 9, she had called her landlord and given notice on the apartment. She sat in the kitchen after the call, in the apartment she had lived in for 4 years, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of a life she had built carefully and was now going to leave, and she let herself feel it, actually feel it, not manage it or schedule it or defer it to a later processing window, for approximately 10 minutes. She cried. Not the beautiful composed version, the real version, which was ugly and exhausting and went on past the point of dignity and came back around on the other side into a territory that felt, when it was over, like an emptied room. She washed her face. She went back to the second bag and checked the vase. Still intact. She added one more thing, a photograph from the top of her dresser, herself and her mother at Amara's college graduation, the two of them squinting into the sun with their arms around each other. Her mother's hand curved over Amara's shoulder with the particular grip of a woman who knows that holding on and letting go are the same gesture. She zipped the bag. She did not know yet where she was going. Portland would not occur to her for another 3 weeks, and Evelyn Mercer's flower shop would not enter her life for 2 months after that. The decision forming in her right now was not yet a destination. It was only a direction, the way a current is a direction before it becomes a river. She carried both bags to the front door. She went back for the flower shears. She stood in the doorway of the apartment, looking in at the space she was leaving, the couch they had chosen together, the rug she had found at an estate sale in Wicker Park, the kitchen where she had cooked on Sunday mornings, while Jae-hyun read the financial news on his tablet without looking up. And she did not allow herself to stand there for long. One long look, then she pulled the door shut behind her. The lock caught with a clean, final sound. She stood in the hallway with her 2 bags and her mother's flower shears, and she understood something that she had not been able to see from inside the relationship, from inside the planning, from inside the long, careful architecture of a life she had built around a man she had never fully known. The thing she had lost was not what she had thought she was losing. She had thought she was losing a marriage, a future, a best friend. What she was actually losing was the version of herself that had agreed, in increments so small she had never noticed the accumulation, to carry more than her share of every room she walked into, to make herself legible and useful and indispensable to people who were measuring her value in a currency she did not know she was spending. That version of herself had already been gone for a long time. She had just not had a name for the absence. She picked up her bags. She walked down the hallway toward the elevator, and the corridor was very quiet, and her footsteps were the only sound. And she did not look back again because there was nothing behind her now that had not already been decided. And the only thing left that required her attention was the door at the far end of the hall, which led to a stairwell, which led to the street, which led to everything that came next and had not yet been determined. She reached the elevator and pressed the button. The doors opened. She stepped in, and the doors closed, and the last thing she saw before they shut completely was the empty hallway behind her, clean and quiet and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened inside it. The way hallways are. The way most spaces are when the people who filled them have finally decided to leave. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and Amara walked out into a Chicago morning that did not know or care what had happened to her. That was the first thing she noticed. The street outside the lobby glass was already running at full speed. A delivery truck double-parked, a woman walking a dog that kept stopping, a man in a suit talking into his phone with the focused urgency of someone whose crisis was purely financial. The city was doing what cities do, which is continue, regardless, at full volume. She stood on the sidewalk with her 2 bags and her mother's flower shears, and she breathed the October air and let the city's indifference wash over her for a moment because it was, in its way, a relief. She called a car. While she waited, she checked her phone. 14 missed calls. 3 from Jae-hyun, spaced, not panicked, the cadence of a man who expected to be called back. 4 from numbers she did not recognize but categorized immediately as belonging to his world. 2 from Zuri. 1 from her aunt in Atlanta. 1 from a bridesmaid who had probably been assigned to locate her. 2 from David Sue, which she flagged to return. 1 from a number she did not recognize, area code she did not immediately place. She did not answer any of them. The car came. She put her bags in. She told the driver an address on the north side, a hotel she had used for overflow guests before, clean and unremarkable, and not connected to any account Jae-hyun had access to. She paid cash at the desk. She was in a room on the 6th floor by 9:45, sitting on the edge of the bed in yesterday's clothes, calling David Sue. The statement landed, David said without preamble. Patricia Osei forwarded your refutation to the full committee within the hour. The Tribune business desk has already reached out to my office for comment. What did you tell them? That my client's name was used without authorization in a commercial press statement, and that we are pursuing all available remedies. That's enough for now. He paused. The committee is meeting this afternoon. One of them, a man named Gareth Mwangi, called my office directly to confirm your position. He specifically asked whether you were aware of the advisory arrangement Jae-hyun described. What did you tell him? That you were not aware because no such arrangement existed. Good. Amara. David's voice shifted slightly. Jae-hyun's legal team contacted my office 40 minutes ago. She absorbed this. How fast? Fast enough that it was already drafted. This isn't a reactive move. They had it prepared. She looked at the wall of the hotel room. Beige paint, a small framed print of something coastal, a mirror that gave her back a version of herself that looked surprisingly composed given everything. What do they want? She said. Withdrawal of the documentation you gathered from the estate account. They're framing it as unauthorized access to proprietary business communications. It was my account, my credentials. I administered it. I know. That's exactly what makes their claim frivolous. But frivolous claims still cost time and money to defeat, and they know that. He let the implication sit for a moment. This is pressure, not law. They want you to go quiet. Amara stood up from the edge of the bed. She walked to the window. 6 floors down, the street continued its indifferent business. I'm not going quiet, she said. Then we proceed. But I want you to understand what proceeding looks like. His legal team is expensive and patient. This could take months. Your name may be in the papers in connection with the project regardless of what we do, at least temporarily. And if Jae Hyun decides to escalate beyond the legal front, he won't. David paused. How certain are you? She thought about Jae Hyun standing at the altar, the hand on her arm, the eyes running their calculation. She thought about the statement filed at 11:15, the prepared legal contact, the structured contingency of a man who had been 3 steps ahead on every front except the one she had controlled. He had not controlled the USB drive. He had not controlled Elena. He had not controlled the projector. Those were the things she had held, and they had been enough to end the wedding, and ending the wedding was what had mattered most. Not the project, not the press release. The wedding, because the wedding was where the transaction was supposed to close, and it had not closed, and without the marriage license, her professional reputation remained legally and contractually her own. Certain enough, she said. She was wrong about one thing. She found out 3 days later. She had moved from the hotel to a sublet in Evanston, a furnished studio belonging to a colleague who was teaching abroad for the semester, arranged through 2 intermediary techs and a cash payment that kept her address off any platform Jae Hyun's people could search algorithmically. She had been sleeping badly. Not because of grief, or not primarily. The grief was there, it was real, but it was the kind she could set aside during working hours. The sleep problem was simpler than grief. It was the specific insomnia of a woman who has removed all of her own safety structures simultaneously and has not yet built new ones. She was at the small kitchen table at 5:45 in the morning, working through her client list with a cup of coffee she had made too strong, when her phone rang. The unknown number. The one from the morning after. She answered it this time. Ms. Vance? A woman's voice. Measured, deliberate, with the accent of someone who had grown up speaking multiple languages and had stopped being detectable about it. My name is Seon-mi Kang. I am Jae Hyun's sister. Amara set down the coffee. She had known Jae Hyun had a sister, had known her name, had seen photographs, had understood from the careful absence of any direct mention that Seon-mi was part of the family history Jae Hyun did not discuss with anyone outside a very specific circle. She had not asked about it because Jae Hyun's silences had always felt like architectural features of the relationship, load-bearing, not to be removed. Why are you calling me? Amara said. Because what my brother is doing is not finished, Seon-mi said, and I think you do not fully understand what he is doing. Tell me. A pause. Not hesitation, consideration. The waterfront project is not simply a real estate development, Seon-mi said. It is a restructuring. Jae Hyun has been moving assets from the operational side of the organization into legitimate holding structures for 3 years. The waterfront project is the final container. Once it closes, the restructuring is complete. What that means is that certain relationships, certain arrangements with people who currently operate within the Mujin structure will change significantly. Amara was very still. How significantly? She said. Some of those people will lose a great deal of money and influence when the restructuring completes. They know this. They have known it was coming. Another pause. They have also been watching the wedding situation very carefully, because if the project stalls, if the development committee loses confidence and the timeline collapses, the restructuring does not complete on schedule. And if the restructuring does not complete on schedule, Jae Hyun's position within his own organization becomes complicated in ways that are not legal problems. Amara understood. She understood it the way you understand something that has been true the whole time and has only now been given its correct name. She put the coffee cup down slowly and looked at the kitchen table and ran the information through everything she already knew. If the project failed, people inside the Mujin syndicate lost money they had been expecting. People inside the Mujin syndicate who lost money they had been expecting looked for a reason it had happened. The reason, in the current narrative, was visible and named and had walked out of a wedding ceremony in front of 200 witnesses. The reason was Amara Vance. He didn't plan for me to be collateral damage, she said slowly. He planned for me to be protected. Once I was his wife, I was inside the structure, untouchable. Yes, Seonmi said, but I walked away. Yes. Which means I'm outside the structure, and the project is stalling because the committee is rattled, and my name is attached to a dispute that's in the papers. The committee meeting yesterday did not go well for him, Seonmi said. Gareth Mwangi abstained. 2 others asked for a 90-day delay pending resolution of what they called the representation discrepancy. 90 days. 90 days of the project sitting in uncertainty while people inside Jae-hyun's organization watched and calculated and decided who was responsible for the stall. He's going to try to fix it, Amara said. Not a question. He already is. He is trying to reach you through channels that are not his legal team. I am telling you this because 2 of those channels are not people who approach things legally. A pause. I am also telling you this because what Jae-hyun did to you was wrong, and I have thought so since February, and I was unable to say so then. I am saying so now. Amara absorbed this for a moment. Why February? She said. Seonmi was quiet for 3 seconds. Because I met Zuri in February, she said, at the estate. I was not supposed to be there. Jae-hyun did not know I knew he was there. I saw them together in the lobby, and I understood immediately what I was seeing, and I said nothing because I did not know you, and I told myself it was not my responsibility. The suite. February 9th through 12th. Simi had seen them. Amara pressed her thumb and index finger against the bridge of her nose and breathed in through her teeth. Okay, she said. What do the channels look like? One of them is a man named Cho. He is not violent by preference. I is, however, persuasive in ways that do not require violence, if the person he is talking to is sensible. A beat. He will try to meet with you. He will frame it as a business conversation. What he will actually be asking you to do is issue a public statement supporting the project and walking back the documentation dispute. And if I don't? Then the narrative inside the organization becomes that you are an active obstacle, not a wronged woman who walked away from a bad situation. An active obstacle. Seonmi let that sit. This is a different category. Amara stood up from the table. She walked 3 steps to the window of the small Evanston kitchen and looked out at a parking lot in a row of bare trees in the early morning dark. She was frightened. She let herself feel that clearly, not as a performance for anyone, not even for herself, just as a fact that needed to be accurately named before she could do anything useful with it. She was a woman who had walked away from a powerful man's carefully constructed plan, in public, and had then actively moved to block its legal and professional execution. And now she was standing in a borrowed kitchen in Evanston at 5:45 in the morning, learning that the fallout had a shape she had not anticipated. She was frightened, and she was also, underneath the fear, made of something that the fear could not reach. She had felt it in the pavilion. She felt it now. Tell me what I need to do, she said. Seonmi told her. It required 3 things. First, David Sue needed to accelerate the filing timeline on the unauthorized representation claim, not settle it, not threaten it, but file it publicly and completely, with all supporting documentation, within 72 hours. A filed claim was public record. Public record changed the cost-benefit of anything that happened to Amara afterward, because a sudden change in Amara's circumstances after a public legal filing did not look like an accident, it looked like cause and effect. And men in Jae-hyun's world were very careful about cause and effect. Second, Amara needed to give a single on-record statement to the Tribune business desk. Not about the wedding, not about Jae-hyun personally, about the project, specifically about the financial documentation she had reviewed and the professional reasons she had declined twice to endorse it. A statement that was precise and grounded in her expertise, that made clear she had independent professional objections that predated and had nothing to do with the personal situation. Third, and this was the part that required something Amara did not immediately know if she had left, she needed to call Gareth Mwangi herself. Why Mwangi? She said. Because he is the committee member most likely to hold the 90-day delay in place long enough for Jae-hyun's internal situation to become visible, Seonmi said. If the delay holds, the pressure inside the organization increases. If the pressure increases, the people who are unhappy with Jae-hyun's handling of this will begin making that unhappiness known through their own channels. And Jae-hyun will be managing an internal problem, not an external one. He cannot do both simultaneously. Amara thought about this. You know a great deal about how your brother operates, she said. I grew up inside it, Seonmi said. It is not a world I would have chosen, but it is the world I understand best. Another pause. He is not going to hurt you, Ms. Vance. I want to be clear about that. What I described about Cho and the channels, that is real, but Jae-hyun himself will not allow direct action against you. He still... She stopped. Started again. His feelings for you are more complicated than what he showed you. That will not save you from the situation, but it is a real constraint on what he will permit. Amara said nothing. I'm sorry, Seonmi said. For February, for all of it. I know, Amara said. She called David Sue at 6. He had the filing ready within the hour. It turned out he had been building it in parallel because David Sue had been practicing law long enough to know that in situations like this one, the first party to complete their paperwork had the structural advantage, and he had not been waiting for instructions to prepare. She called the Tribune contact at 8. The interview took 22 minutes. She spoke about the financial documentation with the measured precision of someone who had spent 11 years in the industry and knew exactly which numbers mattered and why. She did not mention Jae-hyun by name when discussing the project's weaknesses. She did not need to. The project had his name on the letterhead, and everyone on the business desk knew it. Then she called Gareth Mwangi. He answered on the first ring. Ms. Vance, he said, I've been hoping you'd call. I understand you abstained yesterday, she said. I did. I'd like to tell you why I declined to endorse this project. Not the personal situation, the professional reasons. They're specific, and I think they're relevant to the committee's decision. I'm listening, he said. She told him. All of it. The revenue projection assumptions, the financing structure, the infrastructure cost modeling that she had found implausible when she first reviewed it and still found implausible now. She told him clearly, without emotion, because the numbers were not emotional. They were simply wrong, and she had known they were wrong, and she had said so, and she was saying so again now on the record. Gareth Mwangi was quiet for a moment when she finished. The committee will maintain the delay, he said. Thank you, she said. Miss Vance? He paused. I'm sorry you were put in this position. She thought about saying something modest and professional. Instead, she said, so am I. By noon, the filing was public. By 2, the Tribune piece had posted online. By 4, David had received a second call from Jae-hyun's legal team. The tone was different from the first. The first call had been pressure. This one was something closer to assessment, an attempt to take the temperature of how far she intended to go and whether there was a structure for resolution that didn't require prolonged public engagement. David called her immediately after. They want a meeting, he said. Not a legal meeting, an informal conversation. Jae-hyun is asking to speak with you personally. She was sitting in the Evanston kitchen again, the same table, different light, afternoon now, pale and flat through the window over the parking lot. No, she said. That's what I told them you'd say. Tell them again. She hung up and sat with the phone on the table in front of her and the October light going thin through the window, and the particular silence of a person who has just expended a significant amount of themselves and is taking inventory of what remains. There was more left than she had expected. She did not know what to do with that yet. What happened next came from a direction she had not been watching. Zuri had been staying at a hotel downtown since the wedding. Amara knew this because Zuri's location showed on a shared map app they had never gotten around to disabling, and Amara had looked at it twice, not to track her, but in the way you check a wound to assess its state. Zuri had not moved from a 2-block radius in 4 days. On the 5th day, Zuri's location moved to a neighborhood on the northwest side that Amara recognized as belonging to a mutual friend, a woman named Cass, who had known both of them since their early 20s and who operated with the kind of fierce impartiality that made her equally trusted and equally dangerous as a confidant. Amara called Cass. She's here, Cass said, without preliminary. I know. She's not doing well. Cass, I'm not asking you to do anything, Cass said. I'm telling you because you would want to know, that's all. Amara closed her eyes for a moment. What does not doing well look like, she said. Like someone who has been alone with what she did for 5 days and has run out of ways to avoid it. A pause. She asked me if I thought you hated her. What did you say? I said I didn't know. which is true. Another pause. Do you? Amara thought about the anteroom. Zuri's face when she understood Amara knew. The thing that had looked like relief. The specific relief of a secret that has finally become too heavy to carry and is grateful, in some animal way, to be set down. No, she said. Not yet. She's not asking to see you, Cass said. I want to be clear about that. She specifically said not to call you. I called you anyway because I've known both of you for a long time, and I'm not willing to pretend I'm neutral when I'm not. I appreciate that. What are you going to do? I'm going to leave Chicago, Amara said. It was the first time she had said it out loud to another person. Cass was quiet. Where? She said. I don't know yet. She did not know yet. She knew the direction and she knew the principle of it. Distance, a new thing, something that belonged entirely to her and had no fingerprints on it from anyone in the last 6 years. She knew she needed to build something, not rebuild, build. The distinction mattered, because rebuilding assumed a prior structure worth returning to, and what she was coming to understand about the last 6 years was that the structure had been compromised from deeper in than she had known. She started looking at cities the same way she used to research event venues. Systematically, without sentiment, with a specific list of criteria that she wrote out longhand on the back of a hotel notepad she had kept from the night of the wedding. Portland came up on the third day of looking. She had no connection to it, which was part of the appeal. It had a real hospitality industry, a small business culture, a density of neighborhood, commercial spaces that suggested the kind of thing she was considering was possible there. She had been thinking about flowers since the peonies, since the moment she had set the bouquet down in Elena's office, and thought about the fact that she was still holding something she had chosen, something that had been hers before any of this, and that the choosing had been good even if everything around it had not. She found Evelyn Mercer's shop online on a Thursday morning. It was not listed for sale. It was a Yelp page with 43 reviews, mostly warm, the most recent one 6 months old, with a photograph of the exterior that showed a hand-painted sign and window boxes going slightly leggy with the season. In the photograph, a woman who appeared to be in her late 60s was visible through the window, bent over something at the work counter with the focused posture of someone who had been doing this specific thing for a long time. Amara looked at the photograph for a while. She called the shop at 10 in the morning Portland time. The woman who answered was Evelyn Mercer herself, which Amara had not expected. She had prepared for a front desk interaction, and the unexpectedness of it made her speak more directly than she might have otherwise. My name is Amara Vance, she said. I'm an event strategist based in Chicago, and I have a background in floral design that I haven't used professionally in some years. I'm relocating and I'm interested in the hospitality and floral market in Portland. I found your shop and I wondered if you might be willing to have a conversation. A pause. What kind of conversation? Evelyn said. Her voice was low and unhurried, the voice of someone who had been in business long enough to be unimpressed by pitches, but was not yet uninterested in people. The honest kind, Amara said. Another pause. Longer. Come on a Tuesday, Evelyn said. Tuesdays are slow. The legal situation moved faster than she expected. David called her on Friday. The Tribune piece did what it needed to do, he said. 2 committee members who had been sitting neutral have contacted Mwangi privately. The project is effectively stalled for the foreseeable future. He paused. Jae-Hyun's team has withdrawn the unauthorized representation claim entirely. Amara sat up. Withdrew it? Completely. No conditions, no counterfiling. They withdrew it this morning. He let a beat pass, which tells us the internal situation is developing faster than he anticipated. He doesn't want extended public exposure right now. Seonmi was right, Amara said. Who? Never mind. She thought for a moment. Is there anything else I need to do legally? Not urgently. I'll monitor it. If anything moves, I'll call. She thanked him and hung up. She booked a flight to Portland for the following Tuesday. She packed the rest of the Evanston sublet that weekend. Not much, because she had already packed the only things that mattered. She returned her colleague's keys. She called her father. Marcus Vance answered on the second ring, same as always. I'm going to Portland, she said. A long silence. Oregon, he said. Yes. For what? There's a flower shop, she said. I want to look at it. Another silence. She could hear him breathing, could hear the particular quality of his quiet, the way he had always gone still when something required him to think rather than respond. You want to buy a flower shop, he said. I want to look at one, she said. I don't know yet. Amara. I know. Your mother used to say... He stopped, started again. She used to say that you could always tell what something was worth by how scared you were to reach for it. Amara pressed her palm flat against the kitchen table. I know what she used to say, she said. You scared? She looked at the window, the parking lot, the bare trees. Yes, she said. Good, Marcus said. She flew to Portland on Tuesday morning, landing into a gray October sky that sat low over the city like a held breath. She rented a car at the airport. She drove to the address she had written down, a commercial block in a neighborhood that was neither prosperous nor failing, the kind of street that was doing the unglamorous work of remaining. She sat outside the shop for a few minutes. The window boxes were leggy, as the photograph had shown. The hand-painted sign needed repainting. The glass in the front window was clean. Inside, she could see the work counter and the coolers and the particular organized clutter of a working shop, and she could see Evelyn Mercer moving among it with the unhurried precision of someone in complete possession of her space. Amara got out of the car. She was reaching for the door handle when her phone rang. Jae-hyun. She looked at the name on the screen, looked at the shop door, looked at the name again. She answered. Where are you? He said. His voice was... She had not heard it in 12 days. It landed differently than she expected, and she noted the landing without moving toward it. That's not relevant, she said. I need to speak with you. You're speaking to me. A pause. She heard something in the background of his call. Interior acoustics, an office perhaps, no street noise. Controlled environment, of course. The project is stalled, he said. You know that. I do. The situation inside the organization, there are people who are not handling it well. I want you to know that I am managing it. Whatever you may have heard... Seonmi called me, Amara said. Silence. She told me about the channels, Amara said. She also told me what you were actually trying to do with the restructuring, moving assets into legitimate structures, cutting ties with the operational side. She paused. If that's true, and I think it is, because the financial structure of the project actually does make sense as a restructuring vehicle, even if the revenue projections are implausible, then you were trying to get out. He said nothing. You were trying to get out, she said. And you needed the legitimacy of my professional reputation to do it, and instead of telling me that, instead of asking me to help you with what you were actually trying to do, you built a plan around me that treated me as a resource to be managed. Because you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth, or because you knew that if I knew the full truth, I might say no, and you needed me to say yes. Jae-hyun was quiet for a long time. Both, he said. The word came out without its usual architecture around it. Just the word, flat and unfortified, and she recognized it as the closest thing to honesty she had ever received from him, which made it cost more to hear than she had expected. I know, she said. Amara, let me come to wherever you are. One conversation, face to face. She looked at the shop door, at the hand-painted sign, at Evelyn Mercer moving behind the glass with the unhurried certainty of someone who had built something that was entirely hers. No, she said. Amara, you have a real problem inside your organization, and it's not my problem to solve, she said. You built something and it's unstable, and I'm sorry for that. Not for walking away, but for the fact that you're in it. That part I'm genuinely sorry for. She paused. Fix it yourself. You know how. You've always known how. She heard him breathe. And the project? He said. Find a different way to close it, she said. Find documentation that actually holds. Find a consultant who can stand behind the revenue numbers. Do the work. She paused. You were always capable of the work, Jae-hyun. You just preferred the shortcut. He was quiet. Is this... He stopped. Is this the last time we speak? She looked at the shop door. Yes, she said. She heard him take a breath. She heard the office silence on his end, the controlled environment, the world he had built with such careful deliberation over so many years, the world she had come very close to being entirely subsumed into. I did love you, he said. Whatever else. I want you to know that. She stood on the sidewalk in Portland with the gray October sky above her, and let the words arrive and felt what they cost her to hear, and did not move toward them. I know you believe that, she said. She hung up. She stood for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she put it in her pocket, pushed open the door of the shop, and walked in. Evelyn Mercer looked up from the work counter. She was 67 years old, broad-shouldered, with the particular hands of someone who had spent decades in physical work, capable and scarred and direct in their movements. She looked at Amara with the assessing patience of a woman who had been in business for 30 years and had learned to read people quickly, because time was the one thing she had never had enough of. "You're Amara," she said. "I am." Evelyn set down the stems she had been sorting. She looked at Amara's face with the unhurried thoroughness of someone taking real inventory. "You look like someone who just made a difficult phone call," she said. "I did," Amara said. "Good or bad?" Amara looked around the shop. The coolers with their careful organization, the work counter with its accumulated history, the window boxes outside going leggy in the October light, needing attention. "Necessary," she said. Evelyn nodded once. "Coffee?" she said. "But please," Amara said. Evelyn moved toward the back of the shop, and Amara followed, and the door swung shut behind them, and outside on the street the gray October sky held steady over Portland, the way it did for months at a time, inconstant and entirely prepared to outlast whatever came beneath it. The coffee Evelyn made was too strong and served in mismatched mugs, and was exactly what Amara needed. They sat at a small table in the back room of the shop, which was not decorated for guests. It was a working space, with a utility sink and a pegboard hung with tools and a shelf of reference books whose spines had gone soft from use. There was a space heater in the corner running at low. There was a calendar on the wall still showing September. There was, on the windowsill above the sink, a clay pot with a succulent in it that had been there long enough to have outgrown the pot and begun making decisions about its own direction. Evelyn set a mug in front of Amara and sat down across from her with the unhurried ease of a woman who had nowhere more important to be. "So," she said, "tell me about the event work." Amara told her. Not the wedding, not Chicago, not any of what had just collapsed behind her. She told her about the 11 years of building something from nothing, the venues and the vendors and the hospitality relationships, the particular skill set that lived at the intersection of logistics and aesthetics and the management of other people's highest stakes days. She talked about it with the directness of someone who had spent years explaining their value to people who needed convincing, and halfway through she realized she was not convincing Evelyn of anything. Evelyn was simply listening, with the patient receptivity of someone who knows how to wait for the part that matters. "You mentioned floral design," Evelyn said, when Amara finished. "My mother was a florist, amateur. She never had a shop. But she grew things, she arranged things. She taught me the mechanics of it when I was young." Amara wrapped both hands around the mug. "I used it in event work for years. I stopped outsourcing the floral elements entirely about 4 years ago and started doing them myself, cheaper, and I had more control over the result." "What do you know about running retail?" "Enough to know I'd be learning most of it from scratch." Evelyn nodded. She appreciated the answer. Amara could see that, the small acknowledgement of a woman who had heard enough people overstate their preparation to recognize the value of someone who didn't. "I've been thinking about what comes next for about 2 years," Evelyn said. "I'm 67. My knees have opinions about the concrete floor that I didn't used to have to negotiate with. My daughter is in Vancouver and has been asking me to move closer for about 4 of those years." She looked at the shop around her with an expression that was not sentiment exactly, but the specific regard of someone looking at 30 years of themselves. "I built this from a $200 investment and a borrowed van. I don't want to close it." "You want to sell it," Amara said. "I want to sell it to someone who will run it like it means something," Evelyn said. "Not flip it, not rebrand it into something unrecognizable in 6 months. Run it." She looked at Amara directly. "Why flowers? You have an event business. You could rebuild that anywhere." Amara thought about the peonies. about her mother's kitchen windowsill, about standing in Elena's coordinator office with a bouquet in her hands and understanding in the middle of everything falling apart that the thing she was holding was the only part of the day she had genuinely chosen without reference to anyone else. Because I know what they're worth, she said, not commercially. I know what it means to someone when they get them right. I know what it costs when you get them wrong. I've watched flowers change the temperature of a room for 11 years, and I've always known that the flowers were doing more work than anything else in the space. Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. Come back Thursday, she said. I'll show you the books. Amara came back Thursday and Friday, and the following Monday she made an offer on the shop that was honest about what she had and what she would need to finance. And Evelyn spent 48 hours with it and came back with a seller-financed counteroffer that was structured the way Evelyn apparently structured everything, practically, without drama, with the specific generosity of someone who has built something real and wants its survival more than she wants a windfall. Amara signed the agreement on a Thursday afternoon in November, in the back room of the shop, at the small table with the mismatched mugs, with the succulent still growing determinedly out of its too small pot on the windowsill. Evelyn handed her the keys. They were on a plain ring, 3 keys, front door, back door, cooler room, with no ornamentation whatsoever, and they weighed almost nothing, and Amara held them in her palm for a moment and felt the specific gravity of something that was entirely and only hers. Second bloom, Amara said. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. The new name, Amara said. I've been thinking about it. Evelyn considered this. Then she nodded once with the expression of someone who finds a thing correct without needing to say more about it. Second bloom, she said. The first winter was the hardest thing Amara had done since her mother's death. And in some ways it was harder than that because grief was something that happened to you, and this was something she had chosen, which meant every difficulty arrived with the added weight of her own decision behind it. Flowers died before customers came. This was the first and most persistent problem. Inventory management in a retail floral shop was a different discipline from event floral work, where you ordered for a specific date and used everything you had. In retail, you were always guessing, and the cost of guessing wrong was standing in front of a cooler full of stems that had gone past their usefulness and had to be composted. She wasted money in December that she could not afford to waste, and she sat with the waste and learned from it without the luxury of extended self-recrimination, because the shop opened at 8 every morning regardless of what she had gotten wrong the day before. The concrete floor was real. Her feet learned it. Her back learned it. She had spent 11 years in good shoes at well-resourced events, and now she spent 11 hours a day on a surface that did not forgive. And she bought 2 pairs of serious work boots and wore them alternating days, and stopped being surprised by the exhaustion after the first 3 weeks. She hired her first employee in February, a woman named Rosa, who was 26 and had studied horticulture and needed part-time work, and had a gift for customer interaction that Amar recognized immediately as the rarer of the 2 skills. Rosa could make a grieving customer feel seen in the 30 seconds it took to hand over a bereavement arrangement. That was not something you could train into a person. The subscription service launched in March. 12 initial subscribers, weekly arrangements, recurring billing, the kind of reliable baseline revenue that gave Amara a floor to build from. By June, there were 31 subscribers. By the following January, 84. She added corporate accounts in April, memorial arrangements in May, after a funeral home 2 blocks away reached out following a service where the family had come in for flowers and mentioned Second Bloom by name to the director. The wedding service came last. She had resisted it longest for reasons she did not examine too carefully, And then one afternoon, a young woman came in asking about ceremony flowers, with such genuine bewilderment about where to start that Amara spent 45 minutes with her and priced a full wedding package and thought, walking home, that flowers had never done anything to her. Only people had. She started the wedding service in August. What she built was not elegant. It was functional and then profitable. And then, slowly, something more than profitable. It was useful in the specific way that a neighborhood business is useful when it has been there long enough for people to trust it. Customers came back. They brought other customers. A woman who had bought a single arrangement in January came back in October and said that she had been going through something very hard when she bought it, and that the flowers had sat on her kitchen table while she figured out what came next, and that she wanted Amara to know that. Amara said thank you and meant it in the specific way you mean something when it connects to a thing you do not fully discuss. She called her father every Sunday. Marcus drove up from Chicago in June, the first visit, and walked through the shop with the slow, deliberate attention he brought to anything he was assessing. And at the end of it, he stood at the front window and looked out at the street for a while without saying anything. "It's real," he said finally. "It's real," she agreed. He put his hand briefly on the back of her neck, the gesture he had used when she was young, when something difficult was also correct. And then he went to look at the cooler room because he had a question about the refrigeration system. She did not tell him about the hard nights. He probably knew anyway. He had always had the particular parental instinct for what his daughter was not saying. Jaehyun married Zuri 11 months after the abandoned wedding. Amara found out through Cass, who texted a single sentence with no elaboration. They got married, courthouse. She read the text in the back room of the shop on a Tuesday morning and sat with it for a few minutes. She had thought she would feel more when this happened, had anticipated something large and destabilizing, the way you anticipate weather. What she felt instead was smaller and more specific, something closer to the closing of a parenthesis. She went back to work. Cass told her other things over the following year. That the Mujin waterfront project had eventually closed, reduced in scope, through a restructured financing arrangement that took 14 months longer than originally planned and did not include any of the committee members Amara had known. That Jaehyun had successfully completed enough of the restructuring to reduce his organization's operational footprint substantially, though not to exit it entirely. That he and Zuri had lost a pregnancy in the first year of the marriage, which Cass mentioned once and did not mention again. Amara did not ask for more information than Cass volunteered. She thought about Seonmi sometimes. The woman who had called from an unknown number at 5:45 in the morning to tell a stranger the truth about her brother. She had never called back, and Amara had not called her. There was no thread between them that made sense to pull. But she thought about her, about what it cost to do what Seonmi had done, from inside the world she was in. She hoped she was all right. The second year was better than the first in every measurable way, and harder in some ways that were not measurable, because the second year was when the initial emergency receded enough that everything Amara had not had time to feel began arriving on schedule. She felt it mostly at night, and mostly alone, and mostly without doing anything particular about it. She was not built for dramatic processing. She did not journal or call people at 2 in the morning, or sit on the floor and cry in the way she had seen depicted as the appropriate form of emotional reckoning. What she did was work through the day and cook simple food in the evening and sit at her kitchen table after with a cup of tea and let the thoughts arrive without directing them. She thought about the 6 years she had spent constructing a life around a person who was himself a construction. She thought about the ways she had made herself convenient, the professional competence that had been genuinely hers but had been borrowed, leveraged, quietly extracted by someone who understood its value better than he ever let on. She thought about all the times she had chosen to explain away a difficulty as a difference of temperament, a matter of his particular reserve, a feature of the relationship she could accommodate. She thought about whether she had loved him. She concluded that she had, not the version of him she had eventually seen clearly, but the version she had believed in, the guarded, capable man who sent flowers when he couldn't be present and approved budgets by text, and occasionally, in unguarded moments, looked at her with something that seemed to have no agenda in it. She had loved that version, and he had not been a fiction exactly, had not been entirely performed, but he had been insufficient, and she had held the insufficiency in place for 6 years by supplying everything he lacked. She thought about Zuri. The Zuri question was the one that did not resolve cleanly into a single feeling, because the history was too long and too layered and too genuinely mixed for reduction. She had loved Zuri. She was still, in some chamber of herself she could not fully close, a person who had loved Zuri, and the love did not evaporate because the betrayal was real. They coexisted. That was simply what they did. She did not try to fix it. She let it be complicated. Zuri came into second bloom on a Thursday afternoon in October, 2 years and 1 month after the wedding that had not happened. Amara was at the work counter finishing an arrangement when the door opened, and she looked up with the automatic customer-facing readiness she had developed over 2 years of retail. And then she saw who it was, and the readiness went still. Zuri looked different, not diminished. She was still Zuri, still the particular warmth of her, still the breadth of her presence in a room. But something in her had settled into a lower register, the way a voice drops when it has stopped performing and is simply speaking. She was wearing a coat Amara had not seen before, and her hair was different, and she looked like herself and also like a person who had been through something. She stood at the door. She did not move into the shop. "I can leave," she said. "If you want me to leave, I'll go." Amara set down the stems she was working with. She looked at Zuri across the shop floor, 20 feet of it, the tiles she had chosen, and the coolers she had organized, and the work counter that had been Evelyn's and was now hers, and smelled like stems and cold water and the iron and green smell of cut flower work. "Come in," she said. Zuri came in. She looked around the shop the way people look at things they have only heard described, carefully, putting the real thing against the version they had been carrying. She looked at the arrangement Amara had been working on. She looked at the white peonies in the cooler. "It's beautiful," she said. "Thank you." Zuri stopped a few feet from the counter. She put her hands in her coat pockets and looked at Amara with the open, undefended expression of someone who has decided, before arriving, not to protect herself. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not here because of the marriage, or what's happening with that. I'm here because I needed you to know that I understand what I did. Not the way I understood it in the moment, the way I understand it now, after 2 years of living with it." Amara did not say anything. "I told myself for a long time that it was complicated," Zuri said. "That what happened between me and Jae-hyun was something I fell into rather than something I chose. I told myself you were so capable that you didn't need what I was keeping from you. I told myself all kinds of things." Her jaw moved. "None of them were true. I chose it. I chose it 100 times, every time I could have told you and didn't. And the worst part—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "The worst part is that I knew exactly where you were most open. I knew about your mother. I knew every place where you trusted me, and I stayed in those places on purpose, because I knew you wouldn't look too hard at someone you trusted that much." The shop was very quiet. "I know," Amara said. "I'm sorry." The 2 words came out without architecture around them, not the beginning of a longer explanation, just the words, "bear." Amara looked at her. At the face she had known for 14 years, the face that had been beside her in the hospital room and in the wedding suite and in the anteroom where everything had finally cracked open. She looked at it the way she had looked at the water stain in the Chicago apartment, directly, without flinching, seeing exactly what was there. "I believe you," she said. Zuri's eyes filled. "But," she said quietly. "There's no but," Amara said. "I believe you're sorry. I think it's real. I think you've been living with it." She paused. "I also think that what you knew about me and used is something I'm still figuring out how to carry. Not because I can't forgive it. I'm working toward that. But because forgiving you and letting you back in are different things, and I'm not going to confuse them just because this is hard." Zuri nodded, once, slowly. "I'm not asking to come back in," she said. "I know," Amara said. "I know you're not." They stood in the quiet of the shop, and the October light came through the front glass at the low angle. It came at this time of year cutting across the tile and the work counter and the peonies in the cooler, and it was not a comfortable silence, but it was an honest one. "How are you?" Amara said finally. Zuri looked slightly surprised by the question. "I don't know yet," she said. "Better than I was. Not where I need to be." She looked at the floor. "We lost. There was a pregnancy. First year." "I heard," Amara said quietly. Zuri looked up. "I'm sorry," Amara said. She meant it, and she knew it was complicated to mean it, and she meant it anyway. Zuri pressed her hand briefly over her mouth, nodded. "I should go," she said. "Okay." Zuri moved toward the door. She stopped with her hand on the handle and turned back, and what she said was not what Amara expected. "Your mother would have loved this," she said. "The shop. What you've built." She looked at the space again, the coolers, the work counter, the peonies. "She would have said you finally stopped hiding the part of yourself that didn't need anyone's permission." Amara stood very still. "She would have said it differently," she said, "with better timing." Zuri smiled. Brief and real, and something in it that was grief and history and 14 years all at once. "Yeah," she said, "she would have." She left. The door swung shut. Amara stood at the counter for a moment. Then she picked up the stems she had set down and went back to work. 2 months after Zuri's visit, Jae Hyun came. She knew it was him before the door fully opened because she saw the car at the curb through the front glass. A rented sedan, anonymous, the specific anonymity of a powerful man trying not to be visible. And she had a few seconds to decide how she was going to be when he walked in. She decided to be exactly as she was. He came through the door alone. No men behind him. No organization to announce him. He was in a coat she recognized, dark gray, cashmere, the one he wore when he was not performing anything, which was itself a kind of statement. He looked like himself. He looked tired in a way she had never seen from him before. The tiredness not of a single difficult week, but of sustained cost. He stood just inside the door and looked at the shop. "You built this," he said. "I did." He looked at it the way Zuri had, taking inventory, putting the real thing against what he had imagined. He looked at the peonies in the cooler, and something moved in his face that he did not cover as fast as he usually covered things. "How long have you been in Portland?" he said. 2 years? A little more?" He nodded. He moved to the counter slowly, not with the measured forward momentum she remembered, but more carefully, as though he was unsure of the geometry of the space, which was not like him. Jae-hyun had always known the geometry. "The organization," he said. He stopped, started again. "The restructuring completed in September. It took longer than it should have. He looked at the counter. The people who were unhappy with the timeline are no longer part of it. That situation resolved. I'm glad, she said. She meant it in the limited way. Glad no one was hurt. Not glad for him. Not glad for what it cost. I married Zuri, he said. I know. He stopped. His jaw worked. It wasn't what either of us imagined it would be. He stopped again. Without me managing the space around you, Amara said quietly. He looked at her. That's not how I was going to say it, he said. It's what you meant. He didn't deny it. She gave him credit for that. She left 2 months ago, he said. She's in Atlanta. It's over. Not badly. As well as something like that can go. He looked at his hands on the counter. She said before she left that I had never understood what love required of me, that I understood acquisition and management and loyalty, but I had never learned what it meant to let someone cost me something without calculating the return. Amara was quiet. She was right, he said. I know she was right. I've known for longer than I admitted. He looked up. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that I understand what I did. Not because I think understanding changes anything. I know it doesn't. He stopped. I needed you to know. Jae-hyun. He looked at her. Do you miss me, she said, or do you miss the woman who carried your life? The question landed. She watched it land, watched him take it in without his usual reflexive management, without the containment. He sat with it. He actually sat with it, which was not something she had seen him do with a question before. He had always had answers ready, positions prepared, the conversational equivalent of a building that had been fully constructed before you arrived. He looked at her for a long time. I don't know how to separate them, he said, and I understand that that's the problem. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. She had expected it to feel like something significant. Instead, it felt like the quiet that comes after a sound has finished, the room returning to its baseline, the echo finishing, the air settling back into itself. You can change your life, she said. I believe that. You're capable of it. Whatever you were trying to do with the restructuring, getting out, building something legitimate, that intention was real, even if the way you went about it was wrong. She held his gaze. But whoever you become when you do that, that man isn't going to be my husband. That's not a punishment. It's just what's true. He nodded. It was a small nod, and it took a moment to arrive, and she recognized it as the specific gesture of someone accepting something they cannot counter because it is simply accurate. Is there anything I can do? He said. Is there anything? No, she said, not unkindly. There's nothing to do. This is just what it is. He straightened. He put his hands in his coat pockets. He looked around the shop one more time with an expression she could not fully read and did not try to. It's a good shop, he said. I know, she said. He left. She watched him get into the rental car at the curb. She watched the car pull into traffic and move down the street and disappear around the corner, and she stood at the front window and felt the particular quality of an ending that has been arriving for a long time and has finally reached its destination. She turned back to the shop. Rosa was in the back room. Amara could hear her moving around, the sound of the utility sink running briefly and then stopping, the rustle of paper being worked. The shop was quiet in the front, afternoon light going warm and low across the tile, the coolers humming their steady note. Amara went behind the counter and picked up a stem of white peony that had been sitting in water, waiting. She had been building a workshop arrangement. The second location of Second Bloom was opening in 6 weeks, a smaller space 4 blocks away, chosen specifically for its accessible parking and its proximity to a community center where a women's support organization ran a twice-monthly drop-in program. Amara had spent 3 months building the partnership. The workshops would run monthly, floral design for women rebuilding. Not therapeutic in a clinical sense. She was not a therapist and had no interest in performing one. Practical. The kind of rebuilding you do with your hands, with material things, with the simple, irreducible act of making something that hadn't existed before you touched it. She had given the program a name, which she hadn't told anyone yet. She was going to announce it at the opening. It was the same 2 words she had said to Evelyn Mercer on the afternoon she signed the papers and received 3 keys on a plain ring, second bloom. She worked the peony stem into the arrangement and stepped back to look at what she had. It was not perfect. The left side was heavier than the right, and there was a gap in the upper third where she needed more volume, and the color distribution wasn't balanced the way she wanted it. She looked at it with the honest eye she had developed over 2 years of daily work. Not the forgiving eye, not the perfectionist eye, but the working eye that sees what is and what is needed and sets about doing it. She reached for another stem. Her father arrived the following weekend for the second location's opening. He drove up from Chicago alone, arriving Friday afternoon, and Amara met him at the door of Second Bloom in her work clothes, apron, boots, a small cut on her left index finger from a mishandled stem that she had bandaged without much ceremony. Marcus Vance looked at his daughter in the doorway of her shop and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You look like your mother." Amara stepped back to let him in. He spent an hour walking the space, which for Marcus meant moving slowly through every section, opening the cooler room, looking at the organization system, reading the pricing cards, checking the quality of the stems in the display buckets, with the thoroughness of someone who knows nothing specifically about floristry but knows quality in general. On Saturday, the morning of the opening, he arrived before the shop opened carrying something wrapped in newspaper. Amara was behind the counter when he came in. He set the wrapped thing on the counter and waited. She unwrapped it. Her mother's blue glass vase. She had left it behind. She had packed it in Chicago and then unpacked it because the weight of it felt like something she was not ready to carry yet, and she had left it with her father without explanation, and he had taken it without asking for one. She looked at it now. The deep blue of it, the particular way it caught light. Her mother had kept it on the kitchen windowsill for 20 years, and the Portland light was different from the Chicago light, but the vase was exactly the same. "I thought it was time," Marcus said. She picked it up. She held it in both hands the way she had held the keys on the plain ring, feeling the weight of it, the specific gravity of something that belonged to her in the way that almost nothing else did. She carried it to the front window. She set it on the ledge where the light came in low and warm in the late morning. Then she went to the cooler and cut 6 stems of white peony, the same flowers she had intended to carry down an aisle toward a man who had already chosen someone else's hand in the dark, and she arranged them in the blue glass vase with the working eye, the honest eye, adjusting the angle of each stem until the arrangement was not perfect but was right. Her mother had grown peonies along the back fence of their Chicago house, white ones, the same variety, because she said they smelled like something that had decided to be entirely itself without apology. Amara had not understood that as a child. She had thought it was just something her mother said. She understood it now. The opening brought 40 people through the door in the first 3 hours. Rosa worked the front. Amara worked the counter and talked to everyone who wanted to talk. And some people bought things, and some people just looked. And some people asked about the workshops, and she answered every question with the patience of someone who had learned that the question underneath the question was usually, "Is this a place I can trust?" She tried to make it a place they could trust. In the afternoon, after the opening crowd had thinned to a comfortable flow, Amara stood near the front window for a few minutes with a cup of coffee going cold in her hand. She looked at the street outside, Portland, October, gray sky doing its steady work above the city, and then she looked at the blue glass vase on the ledge with its white peonies opening in the warmth of the window light. She thought about the pavilion over Lake Michigan, the projection screen, the 200 people, the weight of Jae-hyun's hand on her arm, and the weight of her father's hand on her shoulder, and the particular sound the lock made on her Chicago apartment door when she pulled it shut for the last time. She thought about all of it in the compressed way you think about your own history when enough time has passed for it to feel like something that happened to a person you know well rather than a person you are. The distance not of forgetting, but of having moved far enough to see the whole shape. She had not been chosen. She had understood that as a wound for a long time, had carried it as a wound in the Chicago hotel room in the Evanston kitchen and the first hard winter in Portland when the flowers died before the customers came and the rent was due, and she was so tired at the end of each day that she fell asleep in her coat twice. She no longer carried it as a wound. What she carried it as now was harder to name, not wisdom exactly, not the clean resolution of a lesson learned, something rawer and more durable than that, something like the knowledge, arrived at through the body rather than the mind, that a person's worth is not a thing that other people grant or revoke, that you can be passed over by someone who is reaching for something else entirely and still be, entirely and without qualification, worth reaching for. That what you build in the afterward is the proof of what you were before it. Amara stood at the window of her shop with the coffee cooling in her hand and watched the street outside and felt, not happiness exactly, happiness was too narrow a word for what was in the room, but something adjacent to it and more permanent. The specific quiet of a person who has stopped waiting to be chosen and started choosing. The white peonies in her mother's blue vase opened a little more toward the light. Rosa called from the back with a question about the workshop schedule. Amara finished her coffee. She turned from the window. She went back to work.